The night I was given one chance to prove myself, I thought the test would be simple. I thought someone would ask me to finish a difficult task, keep a promise, or stand up when everyone else expected me to sit down. I never imagined that the person I had spent years pretending to be would be the very thing I would have to question. And I definitely didn't know that by the end of that night, I would be standing in front of a mirror wearing a dress, trying to recognize the person looking back at me. What happened next changed far more than my clothes. It changed the way I understood confidence, identity, fear, and the strange feeling of discovering a side of yourself that you had spent years trying to ignore. My name is Daniel, and until that week, I had always believed I knew exactly who I was. I was 28, worked in an office, lived alone in a small apartment, and had built my entire life around being dependable. If someone needed help moving furniture, I was there. If a friend needed advice, I listened. If my family needed something repaired, they called me. I liked being the person nobody had to worry about. But there was one thing nobody knew about me. For years, I had secretly been fascinated by feminine clothing. Not in the way people around me might have assumed. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It wasn't about pretending to be someone else for attention. It was simply a private curiosity that had grown slowly over time. I remembered the first time I had tried on something feminine. I was 19. My older sister had left a box of clothes at our parents' house before moving away. One afternoon, when nobody was home, I opened it. There was a simple blouse inside. Nothing dramatic. Nothing revealing. Just a soft, elegant blouse that looked completely ordinary. I held it for almost 5 minutes before putting it back. I remember thinking, why am I even curious about this? I shut the box. Then I opened it again. That was how it began. Not with some huge decision. Just curiosity. Over the years, I occasionally experimented in private. A sweater, a scarf, a pair of shoes. Once, I even tried a complete outfit. Every time, I told myself the same thing. This doesn't mean anything. Then I would put everything away and return to my normal life. But the truth was that it meant something to me. I just didn't understand what. And then I met Claire. Claire was one of those people who could look at you for 10 seconds and somehow notice what you had been trying to hide for 10 years. We worked in the same company, though in different departments. She was confident, direct, and strangely observant. The first time we really talked, she asked me a question nobody had ever asked me before. Why do you always look like you're trying to behave correctly? I laughed because I didn't know how else to respond. What does that even mean? She smiled. It means you look like you're constantly checking yourself before you do anything. I shrugged it off, but the question stayed with me. A few months later, Claire invited me to a small dinner at her apartment. There were only 4 people there. We talked about work, movies, relationships, embarrassing childhood stories, and everything else people talk about when they don't want to admit they're becoming friends. At one point, Claire mentioned that she was helping organize a charity fashion event. I immediately lost interest. Fashion wasn't my thing. At least, that's what I told myself. Then she said something that caught me off guard. We're short one person. I looked at her. For what? She hesitated. For a role. What role? She smiled. You'll find out. I laughed. That's not an answer. It is if you trust me. I should have said no. Instead, I said yes. That was my first mistake. Or maybe it was the first step toward finally understanding myself. The following weekend, I arrived at the event venue. It was a small community hall that had been transformed into a backstage area. Clothing racks lined the walls. Makeup tables were covered with brushes and mirrors. People moved around carrying boxes, steaming clothes, checking schedules, and talking into phones. I immediately regretted coming. Claire found me near the entrance. You're here. You said I was helping. You are. Doing what? She looked at me. Then she smiled. Modeling. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. No. Daniel. No. Just listen. I don't model. I know. Then why am I here? Because the person who was supposed to do it canceled. She pointed toward a garment bag. You're the only person I trust to help me. I stared at her. Help you how? She opened the garment bag. Inside was a beautifully designed feminine outfit. My stomach tightened. I immediately understood. You can't be serious. I am. Claire, absolutely not. She didn't argue. Instead, she said something that completely changed the situation. You don't have to do it. I looked at her. But you told me last month that you wanted to prove you could stop being afraid of everything. I hadn't expected her to remember. She continued, this isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about finding out whether fear gets to make every decision for you. I looked at the outfit again, then at the mirror, then back at Claire. I can't walk out there. You don't have to decide that yet. That was the first turning point. Instead of asking me to perform, she asked me to try. Just try. I went into the changing room. My hands were shaking. I stood there holding the clothes for several minutes. Part of me wanted to leave. Another part of me was strangely curious. I finally changed. When I looked in the mirror, I froze. I expected to feel ridiculous. Instead, I felt unfamiliar. Not bad. Not good. Just unfamiliar. The clothes changed the way I stood, the way I moved, the way I looked at myself. I adjusted the sleeves. Then I took one step toward the mirror. For the first time, I wasn't looking at myself as a joke. I was actually looking. Claire knocked. You okay?
Yeah.
Can I come in? I hesitated. Okay. She entered.
She didn't laugh.
She didn't make a dramatic reaction. She simply looked at me and said, there you are. I frowned. What does that mean? It means you finally stopped hiding from the mirror. I didn't know how to answer. She helped me with a few simple adjustments and showed me how to carry myself naturally. No pretending, she said. What? Don't act like a woman. Don't act like a man. Just stand normally. That advice surprised me. I had expected instructions about posture and movement. Instead, she told me to stop performing. I stood there, and slowly, the tension left my shoulders. The outfit stopped feeling like a costume. It became clothing. That distinction mattered. I walked outside the changing room. 3 people were working backstage. They looked at me. One smiled. Another simply nodded. Nobody laughed. Nobody made fun of me. And somehow that made the experience more intense. Because the only person judging me was me. I spent the next hour helping prepare for the event. At first, I kept trying to hide behind clothing racks. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named Melissa approached me. She was one of the event coordinators. You look nervous. I am. She smiled. Everyone is nervous before they go on stage. I've never done this before. Neither had half the people here the first time. Then she said something I'll never forget. Confidence isn't feeling comfortable. Confidence is staying when you feel uncomfortable. That became the second turning point, because I realized I had spent years waiting to feel ready before allowing myself to do anything. I had been waiting for certainty. It never came. The event began. The lights came on. Music started. People filled the seats. My heart was pounding. I was scheduled near the middle. As I waited backstage, I almost walked away. Then I heard my name. Not the name I was pretending to be. My real name. Daniel. Someone from the organizing team called me. You're next. I stepped forward. My legs felt heavy. I walked onto the stage. The room seemed enormous. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe normally. Then I looked toward the audience. And I saw Claire. She wasn't smiling. She was simply looking at me as if she already knew I could do it. I took another step. Then another. The strange thing was that after the first few seconds, the fear started fading. Not completely, but enough. I reached the end of the runway, turned, and walked back. That was it. The entire thing lasted less than a minute. But when I returned backstage, I felt like I had crossed a border. I changed back into my normal clothes. Nobody made a big deal about it. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I had expected the experience to prove something about clothing. Instead, it proved something about fear. The next morning, I woke up and immediately thought about the mirror. I remembered how unfamiliar I had looked. Then I remembered how natural it eventually felt. I wondered whether that feeling would disappear. It didn't. Over the next few weeks, I began exploring my feminine side more carefully. I bought a few inexpensive pieces of clothing. Nothing dramatic. I learned what colors suited me. I learned that I preferred simple outfits. I learned that certain fabrics made me feel more comfortable. I even started practicing different hairstyles. It wasn't about becoming a completely different person. It was about understanding why certain things made me feel confident. Then came the third turning point. My sister visited unexpectedly. I had forgotten that I had left one of my new outfits in the apartment. She opened the closet. She saw it. Then she looked at me. I froze. For years, I had been terrified that someone I loved would discover this part of me. My sister held the garment for a moment. Then she asked quietly, "Is this yours?" I nodded. She didn't laugh. She didn't look shocked. She simply asked, "How long?" I swallowed. "Longer than I've told anyone." She sat down. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought you'd see me differently." She looked at me. "I do." My stomach dropped. Then she smiled. "I see you as someone who spent too much time worrying about being judged." I almost laughed from relief. She didn't fully understand it. Neither did I. But she didn't need to. She accepted that it was part of my life. That conversation changed me. For the first time, I realized secrecy had been heavier than the clothes themselves. I wasn't ashamed of the clothing. I was afraid of what people might think. Those were two different things. A month later, Claire asked me to join another event. This time I hesitated for a different reason. I was becoming comfortable in private, but I wasn't ready to be seen publicly again. Claire noticed. "You don't have to say yes." "I know. So, what are you afraid of?" I thought about it. "That people will think this is who I am now." She nodded. "And what if it is?" I stared at her. She continued. "You don't have to label yourself today. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. But you also don't have to reject something simply because you're afraid it might change you." Her words stayed with me. I agreed to participate. But the second event was different. This time, someone recognized me. A man from my office was in the audience. I saw him. He saw me. My entire body went cold. That was the fourth turning point. Suddenly, all the confidence I had built disappeared. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe normally. I wanted to run. After the event, I went backstage and changed immediately. I left through the side door. The next morning, I couldn't focus at work. I was convinced everyone knew. Nobody said anything. But my mind kept creating imaginary conversations. They saw me. They're talking about me. They're laughing. I spent the entire day avoiding people. That evening, Claire called. "You disappeared." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." I sighed. "Someone from work saw me. And now everything is ruined." She was quiet. Then she asked, "Did he say anything?" "No." "Did anyone?" "No." "Then you're fighting a conversation that only exists in your head." I hated hearing that because she was right. She told me something else. You don't need everyone to understand you. You need to understand yourself. That became the fifth turning point. I realized I had been trying to control other people's opinions. That was impossible. What I could control was whether I allowed their imagined opinions to control my life. A few days later, the man from work approached me. His name was Marcus. I prepared myself for embarrassment. Instead, he simply said, "Hey." "Hey." He looked uncomfortable. Then he said, "About the event." My heart stopped. He continued, "I thought you looked confident." I stared at him. "What?" He smiled. "I wouldn't have the courage to do that." Then he walked away. I stood there for several seconds. The entire disaster I had imagined in my head had never existed. That moment taught me another lesson. Sometimes the person you fear most isn't judging you at all. Sometimes you're the one doing the judging. Months passed. My life slowly changed. I didn't suddenly become a different person. I still worked. I still went to the gym. I still met friends. I still watched movies late at night. I still had ordinary problems. But I stopped treating my feminine side like a secret emergency. I began treating it like another part of myself. Sometimes I dressed traditionally masculine. Sometimes I explored feminine fashion at home. Sometimes I mixed both. And surprisingly, that freedom made me less obsessed with labels. I no longer needed to prove that I was one thing or another. I simply needed to be honest with myself. Then came the sixth turning point. Claire invited me to a weekend trip with several friends. She warned me that there would be a formal dinner. I thought nothing of it, until she handed me a garment bag. I stared at her.
No.
She laughed. Relax. What is this? Something I think you'll like. I opened it. Inside was an elegant outfit. I looked at her. You planned this? Maybe. I smiled. You knew I'd say no. I knew you'd say no before you tried it. She was right. That evening, I changed. But something was different. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't thinking about what anyone might say. I simply looked at myself and thought, I like this. That simple thought felt revolutionary. At dinner, I walked in. Nobody reacted dramatically. One friend complimented the outfit. Another asked where I got it. The conversation moved on. And I realized something. The world hadn't stopped. My identity hadn't collapsed. Nothing terrible happened. I was simply sitting at a table with people I cared about. The clothes didn't change my value. They only changed what I was wearing. That realization freed me. But the biggest challenge was still coming. My father found out. He didn't discover it accidentally. My sister told him. I was angry at first. Very angry. I felt betrayed. I didn't want another family conversation. I didn't want to explain myself. I wanted to disappear. My father asked me to meet him. I almost refused. Then I remembered the promise I had made to myself. I couldn't keep running. So I went. We sat in a quiet cafe. For several minutes. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, Your sister told me something. I nodded. He looked at me. I don't understand it. I swallowed. Okay. But I want to. That sentence broke something inside me. Not because he suddenly understood. He didn't. But he was willing to listen. I explained that I didn't have every answer. I told him I had been afraid. I told him I had spent years worrying that being different in one area meant I was somehow becoming a different person entirely. He listened. Then he said, I always thought being a man meant never being uncertain. I smiled sadly. That's what I thought too. He looked down at the table. Maybe I taught you that. I didn't know what to say. That conversation became the seventh turning point. My father didn't give me a perfect speech. He didn't suddenly understand everything, but he respected me enough to listen. And sometimes acceptance doesn't arrive as a dramatic celebration. Sometimes it arrives as someone simply saying, I may not understand yet, but I'm listening. After that, I stopped expecting every person to react perfectly. Some people would understand. Some wouldn't. Some would ask questions. Some would make assumptions. That was life. I couldn't control it, but I could decide how I responded. A year after the first event, Claire asked me to do something I never expected. She wanted me to lead a small workshop for people who were nervous about experimenting with fashion. I laughed. You're joking.
No.
I can't teach people. You learned. I learned how to put on clothes. She smiled. You learned how to stop apologizing for being curious. That sentence hit me. I agreed. The workshop wasn't about labels. It wasn't about telling people who they should become. It was about confidence, presentation, self-expression, and understanding that clothing doesn't have to carry shame. People arrived with different experiences. Some were nervous. Some were excited. Some barely spoke. I recognized myself in all of them. I told them about my first time standing in front of that mirror. I told them how badly I wanted to run. I told them about the coworker who saw me. And I told them about the lesson I had learned. You can't build a life around preventing other people from having opinions. One person asked me, How do you know when you're ready? I thought for a moment. You don't. Everyone became quiet. Readiness isn't a feeling that suddenly appears. Sometimes you just decide that fear doesn't get the final vote. That became the eighth turning point in my story, because I realized I was no longer the person who had entered that first changing room. I was now the person helping someone else enter theirs. But my journey still wasn't finished. One afternoon, I received an invitation. It was for a major charity event. The organizers wanted me to participate. Not as a surprise. Not as a replacement. Not because someone canceled. They specifically wanted me. I read the message several times. Then I laughed. 1 year earlier, I had been terrified to walk onto a tiny stage. Now someone was asking me to appear at a major event. I accepted. The weeks leading up to it were intense. I practiced. I prepared outfits. I worked on posture. I learned how to handle nerves. But I also learned something important. Confidence isn't about eliminating insecurity. It's about learning how to move while insecurity is still there. The night of the event arrived. Backstage was crowded. Lights flashed. People moved quickly. I looked at myself in the mirror. For a moment, I saw the 19-year-old version of myself. The young man standing in front of that box of clothes. Afraid to even admit he was curious. I almost cried. Not because I was sad. Because I finally understood how far I had come. Then I heard my name. This time, I didn't freeze. I walked onto the stage. The audience was enormous. But instead of looking at them and wondering what they thought, I looked forward. I walked. I smiled. I turned. And when I reached the end of the stage, I realized something. I wasn't proving that I could dress differently. I was proving that I could stop being afraid of myself. That was the 9th turning point. The event ended successfully. But afterward, something unexpected happened. A young person approached me. They were nervous. They said, "I saw you last year." I asked, "At the first event?" They nodded. I was thinking about trying something similar, but I was scared. What changed? They smiled. You looked scared too. I laughed. That's not exactly inspirational. It was to me. They explained that seeing someone nervous, but still walking onto the stage had given them courage. That conversation stayed with me. I had spent years thinking I needed to become fearless before I could inspire anyone. But maybe being honest about fear was more powerful. Maybe courage wasn't about looking fearless. Maybe courage was letting people see that you were afraid and doing it anyway. A few weeks later, I returned home after a long day. I opened my closet. There were my suits, my sweaters, my everyday clothes. And beside them were the outfits I had once been too embarrassed to own. I stared at everything. For the first time, I didn't see two different lives. I saw one life. Mine. That was the 10th turning point. I understood that I didn't need to divide myself into categories. I didn't have to say, this is the real me, and this is the fake me. Both were expressions of me. The clothing didn't create a new person. It revealed possibilities I had been too afraid to explore. I sat on the edge of my bed. I thought about all the times I had asked myself whether something was normal. Then I realized that normal had never been the right question. The better question was, does this help me understand myself? If the answer was yes, curiosity deserved space. I began writing about my experiences. Not publicly at first, just in a notebook. I wrote about fear. I wrote about confidence. I wrote about clothing. I wrote about the first time my sister saw me. I wrote about my father. I wrote about Marcus. I wrote about Claire. And eventually I wrote about the person I had been before all of this. I realized that person wasn't weak. He had simply been scared. There is a difference. Being scared doesn't make you broken. Staying trapped because you're scared is what can slowly shrink your life. One evening, Claire read some of what I had written. She looked at me. You should share this. I shook my head. Nobody wants to hear it. I did. You're my friend. Exactly. I smiled. She continued. Someone else needs to hear that they're not the only person who has ever been confused about themselves. That became the 11th turning point. I started sharing my story. At first, only a few people saw it. Then more. Some comments were supportive. Some were curious. Some were critical. Some people completely misunderstood. But something surprised me. The negative comments didn't destroy me. They didn't even hurt as much as I expected. Because I had already learned the most important lesson. Other people didn't get to define me. I could listen to reasonable criticism. I could learn. I could grow. But I didn't have to surrender my identity to strangers. The story began reaching people who had never attended one of my workshops. Messages arrived. People told me they had hidden clothes in drawers. Some said they were afraid of being discovered. Some said they had spent years wondering whether their curiosity meant something bigger. I never told them what they were. I couldn't. That was their journey. Instead, I told them what I had learned.
Take your time.
Don't force a label. Don't make major decisions just because someone else expects them. And don't treat yourself like a problem that needs to be solved. That advice became the heart of everything I shared. Then one morning, I received a message from an unknown person. It said they had been considering throwing away every feminine item they owned because they were ashamed. They had seen my story. They hadn't thrown anything away. They weren't ready to talk about it, but they had decided to stop hating themselves for being curious. I stared at that message for a long time. I remember myself at 19, holding that blouse, afraid of what it meant. I wished I could go back and tell that younger version of me something. You don't have to know everything today. You don't have to choose a label today. You don't have to prove anything today. Just don't turn your curiosity into shame. That was the final lesson. The final turning point wasn't about clothing at all. It was about self-respect. Years later, people sometimes ask me about the title of my story. They ask, what was the one chance you had to prove yourself? For a long time, I thought the answer was the stage, the first event, the charity show, the workshop. But now I know the truth. My one chance wasn't to prove that I could look feminine. It wasn't to prove that I could walk on a stage. It wasn't to prove that I could face my family. My one chance was to prove something to myself. That I could be honest. That I could face uncertainty. That I could explore without hating myself. That I could hear someone else's opinion without letting it become my identity. And most importantly, that I could stop living my life as a performance designed to keep everyone else comfortable. The night before my biggest event, I stood in front of the mirror again. The same thing I had done years earlier. But this time, the reflection didn't feel unfamiliar. I smiled. I remembered the frightened person who had once stood in that same position. I remembered Claire saying, "There you are." I finally understood what she meant. She wasn't talking about the clothes. She was talking about the person underneath the fear. The person who had always been there. The person who had spent years asking permission to exist. I didn't need permission anymore. I looked at the clothes hanging in the closet. Then I looked at my own reflection. And I realized something simple. Clothes can change your appearance. Experiences can change your confidence. People can change your perspective. But the deepest transformation happens when you stop treating yourself like someone you need to escape from. I used to think crossdressing was the thing I had to hide. Now I understand that the thing I really had to hide was fear. I had been hiding from judgment, from uncertainty, from questions, from myself. And once I stopped running, I discovered that there was nothing behind me chasing me. There was only a version of myself waiting to be understood. My story didn't end with me becoming someone else. It ended with me finally becoming comfortable being myself. And maybe that's what makes these journeys so powerful. Sometimes the clothes are only the beginning. Sometimes the mirror is only the doorway. Sometimes the person you think you're becoming is actually the person you were too afraid to meet. I still have days when I feel uncertain. I still have moments when I wonder what people think. I still have moments when I question myself. But now I know that uncertainty doesn't mean I'm going backward. It means I'm human. And when fear returns, I remember that first night. The changing room. The shaking hands. The mirror. The stage. That one chance.
I remember standing there thinking I had to
prove myself to everyone. Now I know I only needed to prove one thing. That fear would no longer make every decision for me. And if there is one thing I would tell anyone watching who has ever hidden a part of themselves because they were afraid of being judged, it would be this. You don't have to rush. You don't have to label yourself. You don't have to become someone else's idea of who you should be. You don't even have to understand everything immediately. But give yourself permission to be curious. Give yourself permission to learn. Give yourself permission to discover what makes you comfortable. And most importantly, don't confuse fear with truth. Fear will tell you that everyone is watching. Fear will tell you that one mistake will ruin everything. Fear will tell you that being different means being alone. Sometimes fear lies. Sometimes the world is far more accepting than the voice inside your head predicts. And even when someone doesn't understand you, that doesn't automatically mean you are wrong. It only means they are seeing your life from the outside. You are the one living it. You are the one who has to wake up every morning and live with the choices you make. So make those choices thoughtfully. Make them honestly. Make them safely. And make them because they reflect who you are becoming, not because you're terrified of what someone else might say. I spent years thinking my feminine side was something I had to defeat. Then I spent months thinking it was something I had to explain. Eventually, I realized it was simply something I needed to understand. That difference changed everything. And perhaps that's why the night I thought would expose me actually became the night that introduced me to myself. I went there believing I had one chance to prove myself. I left knowing I had been proving myself wrong for years. I had believed I wasn't brave. I had believed I couldn't handle judgment. I had believed I had to fit neatly into one version of myself. I had believed that curiosity was something shameful. Every one of those beliefs was challenged. And every challenge made my world a little bigger. That's the part one never expected. I thought discovering another side of myself would make my life smaller. Instead, it made my life larger. I met people I would never have met. I had conversations I never thought I could have. I became closer to my sister. I repaired an unexpected distance with my father. I found a friend in Claire who saw through my excuses before I even understood them. And I discovered that confidence doesn't come from looking perfect. It comes from knowing that even when you feel uncomfortable, you won't abandon yourself. That is what I carry with me now. Not a costume, not a role, not a performance. A lesson, a memory, a mirror. And the knowledge that the person staring back at me was never someone I needed to be afraid of. The funny thing is, if you had asked me years ago whether I believed a single outfit could change my life, I would have laughed. Clothes don't change people. I would have said that. And technically, I was right. The clothes didn't change me. What they gave me was an opportunity to question the rules I had built around myself. The clothes gave me a moment. The moment gave me courage. The courage gave me honesty. And honesty gave me freedom. That's the transformation I never saw coming. Not from man to woman. Not from one identity to another. But from someone constantly performing for the world into someone finally willing to listen to himself. And that was the real proof. Not that I could wear feminine clothing. Not that I could walk on a stage. Not that I could survive someone's opinion. The real proof was that I could look into a mirror and no longer feel the need to apologize for what I saw. I had one chance to prove myself. I thought it was one night. I was wrong. It was every morning after that. Every morning I had another chance to choose honesty over fear. Every morning I had another chance to learn. Every morning I had another chance to become a little more comfortable with the person I was. And I still do. Maybe that's the part of the story that matters most. Transformation isn't always one dramatic moment. Sometimes it's 100 tiny decisions. Trying something.
Stopping.
Thinking. Trying again. Looking in the mirror. Laughing at yourself. Learning. Changing your mind. Changing your clothes. Changing your expectations. And eventually realizing that you don't need to become perfect to become comfortable. You only need to stop fighting yourself. So when I think about that first stage now, I don't remember the lights. I don't remember the audience. I don't remember the outfit. I remember the second before I stepped forward. That tiny moment when I could have walked away. I remember thinking, what if everyone judges me? Then I heard my name. I took one step. And another. And another. That was the moment my life began changing. Not because I became someone else. Because I stopped letting fear decide who I was allowed to be. And if there is one final thing that experience taught me, it's this. You don't always get to choose what people think of you. You don't always get to control how they react. You don't always get to know exactly where your journey is going. But you do get to choose whether you meet that uncertainty with shame or curiosity. I chose curiosity. It took me a long time, but I did. And looking back, I wouldn't erase the fear. Because without the fear, I might never have realized how much courage was already inside me. I wouldn't erase the awkward moments. They taught me humility. I wouldn't erase the questions. They taught me patience. I wouldn't erase the judgment. It taught me that my worth couldn't depend on universal approval. And I wouldn't erase the first time I looked in that mirror. Because that frightened person was trying his best. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know where the journey would lead. He only knew that something inside him was asking to be understood. So I listened. And that was the best decision I ever made. The next time I stood in front of the mirror, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I simply smiled. And for the first time, the reflection smiled back without fear. That was when I finally understood. I never needed one chance to prove myself to the world. I needed one chance to stop running for myself. And once I took that chance, I discovered that the person I had been searching for wasn't waiting somewhere in the future. He had been standing in the mirror all along, waiting for me to look closely enough to finally see him.